and welcome Nicole to the IFTN presentation and let you take it away from here.
Sounds good. Thanks, Heather. Let me share my screen quick. So I'm excited to be here. And so I'm sorry you lost your other presenter, but I feel fortunate that I got to step in. I live in Madison, Wisconsin, and I work with the Family Business Consulting Group. We're based in Chicago, but we have consultants all over the country, actually all over the world now. And we work with families from all different industries, all different sizes. I've started specializing kind of in the farming ag sector, simply from living in Wisconsin. That we've got a lot of agriculture here. I grew up actually just not too far away from where Joy's at right now. I grew up in Plain, Wisconsin, and we're a very, very heavy agricultural area. So it's kind of what I grew up in. And also I grew up in a family business. My family owned the grocery store in Plain. I was fourth generation. So I have a little bit of an insider perspective when it comes to working with family businesses because I've been on both sides of the coin. So I kept the same title from your previous presenter, but I have a little bit less aggressive of an agenda, so we can go into a little bit more detail than I think was originally planned. So we're going to start with a model. We're going to start with what we call the three-circle model. It's a model that's been in the family business research field since the 80s. It came out of Harvard and is kind of seen as the foundation to a lot of family business concepts. And some of you just knowing, being in your advisory role, you may have come across this before. So this may look familiar to you. Then we're going to get in focusing on the next gen of leaders a little bit and talking about what they need to know to be successful. And then we're going to talk about senior generation leadership shifts. And I do want to note, I'm calling it the senior gen today. Some prefer when you're talking to them, leading gen or current gen. They can get a little snippy if you start calling them the senior gen before they consider themselves to be seniors. So, but for our purposes, we're going to call them senior gen today. And then as we're going to wrap up with generations working together and then bringing the whole thing together, everything we talked about with some best practices and how you can start applying this to your clients and the other people that you work with. So to start, I want to talk a little bit about what makes family businesses so challenging. So we've got kind of the family on one side, you've got the business, and I'm using the business and the farm interchangeably as we go about today, because a lot of what I do too is helping families start to run their farms or their ranches like a business. And so I try as much as possible to start calling it a business and not just the family farm or the family ranch that we want it to run like a business. So we've got the family on one side, we've got the business on the other. And you've got this inherent natural tension between the family and the business or the farm. So if you think about what kind of makes up a family or what's important to a family, they're more emotional, right? There's little change. We tend to err on the side of tradition. If you think about it, how many families, and maybe even your own, do the same thing for the holidays year after year because it's what we've always done. It's just what we do. Tradition is important. There tends to be a little bit more unconditional acceptance on the side of the family. And the main goal of a family is to nurture and grow adults, right? You want to grow successful people in a family system. On the business side, that tends to be a little bit more fact focused. You have to change to stay current, to stay profitable. There's conditional acceptance. How is someone performing? How is someone producing? And if you think about your own companies, your own employers, what are the conditions of your employment? What do you have to do to stay employed there? And compare that with the conditions of being a member of your own family. How do those differ? We may want to fire our spouses, our kids. That's not as easy to do, right? Then in a business, it's a little bit easier to remove somebody from the system. And the goal of the business overall is to generate profits. If you're not making any money, you don't have any money, you don't have a business. You can't stick around. And you also want to develop skills. So kind of to sum it up, on the family side, the goal is harmony and business is results. So you've got two different perspectives and you're cramming it all into one system. In a nutshell, kind of, if you think about it from a farming perspective, family, do I attend my kid's football game this weekend or do I need to work late in the field? There's just this natural organic tension between these two. Then, because those that own a family business are so lucky, we get to add in another element to that, which is the ownership piece. So if you look at this is the basis of the three-circle model here of a family business system. So I'm going to show you that kind of how this model shifts. This is how the family business ownership system evolves over time. So they start where everything is kind of stacked on top of each other. Usually in the founding generation or the first generation, the owners are family, they are the business. We may not have any outside employees that we're not related to. Everything is all in one. And then as we pass through generations, we see these start to spread out in different, you've got different members of the family, of the system, of the business in different roles. So we see these, in the next slide, I refer to them as different hats, but we've got different roles that everybody's playing within this little bit larger system. So what we see a lot is in farming and ag families, they spend a lot of time kind of in the middle, going back to this here where everything is on top of each other, with all of these overlaps, all of these really, really heavy kind of gray areas between what hat you're wearing and what role you're playing at any given time. If you dig into that though, and especially as you move into different generations beyond that first, the ownership, even if the ownership does go from one family member to another one family member in the next generation, you can have other siblings involved. You may have a spouse or their kids involved. The farm may have grown from all family employees to include some that are not of relation. So you do end up getting all of these different pieces at play. And so to dig into it, in any given family business system, there can be 7 different hats that somebody may be wearing. This is also what we were talking about, that natural tension between just the family and the business. When you throw in that ownership piece too, you've got even more tension. So we need decision-making processes in each area to manage those tensions. There's just a lot of different dynamics going on here, and it could be the exact same people coming from one of these different circles at any given time. So we've got kind of right in the smack dab middle, we've got a family member who works for the business and is an owner. Number 2 is right over on kind of the left-hand side, if you're looking at it, family member who works in the business but doesn't have ownership. So we do have a lot of next gens that typically fall in this area for quite a while until they get some ownership of the farm. And if you look at the third kind of circle just above 1, you've got a family member who is an owner and doesn't work in the business. And especially in farming or ag families, this can be a major sticking point, because you've got people that are in the business that are working day in and day out on the farm. They may have to share ownership with a sibling or a cousin that doesn't work there and doesn't have the same perspective that they do. That can breed a lot of frustration within families. 4, you've got family members that aren't owners and they're not working on the farm at all. They're simply family, but they can still have a heavy influence over everything else. Then in the 5th spot, going back to the mix of the green and the yellow on the right, you've got people that aren't family working in the business and may have owners. If you think about an ESOP, this is where you've got employees that are owners, but they're not related to each other. That's kind of this circle here where something like that model would fall. Or I know some farming families that have given ownership to maybe a long-term employee as a benefit for working with them for so long. So they're not of family relation, but they do have some ownership and they do work on a farm. Then in 6, we've got non-family people that are related to you, employees that are working on the farm. And then 7, we've got owners who is not part of the family and not part of the business anymore. A lot of times this happens when people retire, that they may have gotten ownership and then have since retired. So all of these different things are going on at one time and could be at play on any given day. So I'm going to dig into these just a little bit more. So if you look at the family, think about how you get into a family circle. How do you become a family member? You're born into it, right? Or you're adopted into it. We tend to be more secret or private in the family sector. We protect our own, right? Things that happen within the family, we don't often advertise to the rest of the world, even though I'm sure most of us know how a small town works and that doesn't always happen. But families tend to be a little bit, keep things more close to the vest. And family is the first, the primary, and almost always the most powerful system we belong to. So even when we're trying to run our farms like businesses, that family pull, that family influence can provide a lot of advantages. It can provide a lot of support, and it can also provide a lot of frustration. We tend in families to want to keep things stable, minimize change, keep things as a status quo. And what we find here is the biggest business related decision is letting go. How do we let go of maybe being the patriarch or matriarch of our family and passing not only the business or the farm on to the next gen? How do we start to pass on leadership of the family also? So also, as we're thinking about some of the big concerns in the circle as it relates to the business or the farm, how will having the farm or the business affect our family relationships? Could it hurt them? Could it enhance them? What does that look like? And then from the next gen lens, will I ever have a chance to work in the business or on the farm? And on the flip side, do I have to? Is that my only option? Am I obligated to work for the farm? Then moving into the business circle, how do you get into a business? How did you get all of your roles? You're hired, right? You may be interviewed, you're hired into your position. You probably have some sort of job description, even if it's informal. You know what you have to do and you have more formal expectations of you. We typically don't see those formal job descriptions in the family business realm until later generations because you kind of do what needs to be done. And especially in the ag world, a formal job description is even more rare. If you're working with a big farm or a big ranch, they probably do have some sort of organizational structure. Some of the smaller operations don't and won't. So if you think about the concerns here, particularly from that of the next gen, can I achieve what I want to here? Can I achieve my career goals here? Will I be paid fairly for my work? And then from the senior gen, we have to worry about nepotism a little bit. Am I giving opportunities to my kids that I wouldn't if they weren't related to me? And then lastly, looking at the ownership circle from the lens of the senior gen, can I get what I need out of this when I want to get out? It is very rare, and those of you that are estate planners know this, for a farming family to pull much money out of the farm at all. It's rare that those that own the farm are building their own retirement, unless it's a massive operation and they are running like a business. It's rare to pull money out. And so when it comes time to transition to the next generation, they don't have a 401k or something like that to lean on. And so then it becomes a balance about what can the farm afford to pay the exiting, and I use that in quotes, the exiting owners, while that's trying to support a generation of newer owners. So kind of that's where the ownership piece becomes really, really tough to manage in the farming and ag world. So a big concern in this circle here is, how do I exit the ownership group? How do I enter? And then especially if you've got owners that aren't in the business every day, are they getting adequate information about their investment? Technically, they could pull their investment, right, and go do something else with it. So are they getting enough information to feel like they should keep their investment here? So again, overall, you've got 7 different interest groups with their own goals, their own dynamics, their own objectives. And so kind of, if you kind of think like in your advisory role for a second, you can start to predict where individuals will have concerns based on what segment they fall into. So if you look at kind of the non-family owner employees, they can share some ownership concerns and business concerns, where the family employees are going to share family and business concerns. The family owners are going to share family and ownership concerns. And right in the middle, the family owner employees, they can share concerns from all 3 buckets, plus keeping the whole thing afloat. So if you keep thinking about this as a system, think about it as a baby mobile. If you pull on one side of the mobile, what happens? The whole thing goes crazy, right? Or if you throw a rock into a pond, you get this ripple effect, right? Where everything is affected. This happens in the family business system too. If one of these circles is out of alignment or is out of whack, it can send ripples through the entire system. So say there's a fight on the family, or I have to fire my brother. So let's start with the business side. I have to fire my brother. We're having Thanksgiving next week. How do you think that's going to go? So if you've got misalignment or something is exploding or even simmering underneath, I don't like how my brother decided to plant this year. Where do you think that's going to come up? You don't know, right? It could come up in any one of these circles. So what I want to remind you of here again as advisors, keep these 4 big things in mind. Working together beyond the family relationship continues to add multiple layers of complexity. Family members are often uncomfortable with conflict. We talked about the family tends to want to keep things as stable as possible. So we get a lot of these things that just kind of stay buried, but simmer underneath the surface. And I'm sure kind of from an outsider's perspective looking in, you can feel it. You know when there's something going on just underneath the surface. 3, families often have a reflex or reactionary response. Remember, we talked about how emotional family systems can be. So that can easily blow things out of proportion. I was working with a family one time and they had a big fight at home on the family side, didn't know how to deal with it there. So in one of our meetings, we were talking about strategy and they ended up getting in a massive, massive fight, almost coming to blows over where they were going to put the dumpsters in their parking lot. Because that's what they could wrap their heads around, and that's what they were ticked about, and that's what they were going to yell about today. So then the 4th one I want you to remember is that living together, working together, and owning together, which a lot of our farming families do, adds yet another layer of possible tension. And that is what's underlaying all of this all the time. So to use this model, this is the last piece on what we're going to do in the model, and then we're going to dive into the working with the families. You can use this, as I mentioned, to identify where some of the issues are coming from. Why are 2 owners angry at each other? Is it because of the business? Is it because of the family? And again, this is what I was mentioning before, listed out. You can predict what concerns individuals are going to have based on where they fall into. So before we move into the next gen, senior gen, and then working together, does anybody have any questions about the model? I want to make sure you've got a good understanding of that before we move on to the next piece. Cool. Okay. If you do have any questions along the way, feel free to ask them. We can ask them in real time, and I do have some time at the end that we can conquer them all. Okay. So shifting gears then to the next gen. What does the next generation really need to know to be a successful business leader? And what we see a lot in farming families is that the next gen is working on the farm and has experience on the farm since they can walk, right? And sometimes even before then. So they know what tasks need to be done. They know how to do the day in and day out operations of the farm. What we're talking about here is how do we take them to the next level? How do we help them be good business leaders and good owners, move beyond being task-oriented and look at the big picture? So we start, and this is true of any family business, not just in the ag sector, but the first learning is pretty informal. It's around the dinner table, right? And this can also form the next generation's attitude and how they view their family business. If dad's coming home from work every day and he's complaining about what an awful day he had and just how miserable it was and how he hates having employees and he's just not excited about it, what type of attitude do you think their kids are going to have towards the family business? So we want to help. Then on the flip side, you don't want it to all be roses and sunshine because we know that's just not the case. So you want to just be careful, especially when the kids are getting to an age where they're starting to soak all of this in, that we're kind of monitoring or having maybe some follow-up conversations about what it's like to be part of this. And then there's a study out there if you're interested. It's called the Do You Know study. They went around and asked future generation family members 20 yes or no questions. And what came out of this is that, especially teenagers on up, those that knew more about their family's history showed higher levels of emotional well-being and bigger connections to their family business. And they went a bunch of cross industries. So there was some ag and there's some construction and just a bunch of different industries out there. But they were answering questions like, do you know where your parents met? Do you know where they went to school? Do you know how this farm was founded? That once you get into particularly generation 3 and beyond, they may not know the founders. Their grandparents may have passed already, so they don't have kind of the background or the history about how their family got to where they are, why this farm is still here, how did you grow, why are we in this, why are we still in this? So having some of those stories told, especially if you do have grandparents or founders still around, is really important. Then as they're getting older and just to expose them and get them thinking about this, around the high school age is where we want the next gen to be learning more about the industry, not just what life looks like on our farm, but what life looks like outside of our farm and what's involved in our industry and being a part of our industry and competing there, how the business functions. And this gets to be really crucial if they're going to be or could be running things with their siblings or their cousins. Around this stage, around that high school, early college stage, you want to start shifting their relationships from that just of family members to as potential business partners. They're going to be running this thing like a business, hopefully. And so we want them to not just see each other as brother, sister, cousins, but as potential partners or potential co-owners in this whole operation. Also around this time, if you've got some expectations set or the family has some expectations set around entering the business, this is when you want to share that. And some families call this a family employment policy. I've seen some farming families have this, some have it not quite a policy, but a kind of a goal to shoot for. It's basically the expectations that the senior or current gen have for the next gen before they can come work in the business or on the farm. So you want them to know these expectations though before they're down the road and think they've got an easy path or they've got a planned path into the farm, and all of a sudden you say, no, you need to do these 4 things before you can. That's going to set them off. Where if they know that ahead of time and they can work towards it, that's a much easier conversation and expectations are understood across the board. So as we keep going kind of this quote unquote formal education.
Nicole,
Yeah.
we had a question come in there that
Yep.
says, do you have any examples of a family employment policy or plan?
Yes, they do. So the big things that are covered in what I typically see in an ag family is if they require any outside schooling, whether it be even just a technical degree, some require some sort of mechanic training, some do a lot of finance for non-financial managers. That's a big one. We see a lot of next gens that have no idea how to even write a check anymore, much less look at a balance sheet or look into tax parceling and stuff like that. So just some basic kind of, that's what I call business 101 here. But it could be some sort of training like that. A lot of them, when possible, include some outside experience away from the family's farm. So we've got some families that will almost swap kids where the kids will go work on a different family's farm. So kind of the motivation there is, and if you've got kids, I'm sure you understand this, where you can tell your kid something 19 times, they hear it from somebody else once, and they're like, oh, guess what I just learned? Where you get some training and kind of just experience from someone else that isn't on your farm. This isn't always realistic or possible to do in farming families, but when possible, it's fantastic. I have quite a few in the area where the kids have worked for a business in town or again, a local mechanic shop, something like that, just to get some outside work experience from somewhere that they didn't grow up in. And this can be the basics of learning a work ethic, and being to work on time and working full weeks and stuff like that. Also, typically in a family employment policy, then we see if they have to apply for a position, if there has to be an open position, if a position will be created for them, some sort of feedback policy about how they're going to be getting feedback, that we want to give them regular reviews. And it doesn't have to be that formal, but you want to give them feedback on their work, what's working and what's not, and a structure for doing so. So it's not just dad coming out and yelling at them when they do something wrong. And it helps also in that policy to lay out a development plan. If the ultimate goal is for them to be an owner, what are their development milestones along the way? How are they going to get that? How are they going to learn what they need to be a successful owner? I have some examples too. I can send to Joy and she can share. I'm trying to think if I have a recent one from an ag family where I've got a couple from different industries, so it won't all fit, but you can see a couple and strike what wouldn't work and in the ag sector. And let me know if that didn't answer it. I can dig into that a little bit more later. But understanding those policies is important for the next gen to know, and not just the what about the policy, but the why for the policy. Chances are they weren't there when it was written, that it may be parents writing down their expectations for employment. And this could also be helpful for the senior gen to get down sooner rather than later, especially if it's not a large farm operation where the farm without a lot of scale won't be able to support multiple families, where it may be able to support, you know, a couple and their 3 kids. But if all 3 kids want to work for the farm and those kids have their own kids, the farm may not be big enough to support that many owners. So it would be helpful for the senior gen to have written or at least informally expressed to their kids what it would take for all of them to come into the farm, or whether or not they can all be owners, or you have to work in the farm to be an owner, just getting those expectations down. And so those that are most affected by the policy or would have to listen to the policy probably weren't in the room when it was written or even discussed. So understanding the motivations for that policy, where it came from. A lot of families have started doing code of conduct policies. This is kind of what we expect of you, whether you're related to us or not, to work here. It's almost like the step before an employee handbook, how we expect you to show up. And a lot of them work in small communities. So when you're out after work on Friday, you know, you're not running your mouth about how we are planning our planting operation this year or something like that. Other big one here is, especially for siblings, we talked already about how families are the deepest relationships we'll ever have. In siblings, in my work, that's the most intense relationship that we have. So we need to know how to play not only nicely, but productively. We say this a lot in family business, that we know how to push our siblings' buttons because we put them there. And so it's real easy for that family and that business circle to overlap, or us to be trying to talk about business. And all of a sudden I'm throwing a jab in front that I know is going to tick you off because I know you as a family member. So as they're growing up and becoming adults, knowing how to play together, not nicely, but productively, for the good of the family and for the good of the farm. So some tips here on bringing in the next gen. Things to think about that you can help the families that you're working with start to get organized. When should the next gen become involved in the business? And remember, I mentioned that they probably worked in the farm for a long time. They already know the farm in and out. So a big piece of this is, how do we get them to not just focus on the tasks that need to be done day in and day out, but how do we look at the big picture? How do you look year over year? How do you do some of the long-term planning that is required? What is the best avenue to educate and develop the next gen? And a big piece of that is timing. Farms are cyclical. So when is the best time of year to bring some of this stuff in? When can they get the most experience? What does the next gen need to know to be productive contributors in our business? And here I say we, this could be advisors, parents, whoever's going to have a big influence over the next gen and be pretty involved in their development should start thinking about these questions. This is what I say, kind of getting the next gen involved. And this could also be in a family employment policy. I don't often see it written down in when farming families put one of these together. Actually, kind of a side funny story about a family and a farm trying to put one of these together. I was running a big workshop a couple of years ago, and a mother was there with 2 of her sons and both sons' wives. And she was real quickly trying to throw a family employment policy together that would include one spouse, but not the other one, and was asking these questions in front of the entire room, in front of her daughter-in-laws, and was trying to figure out how she could get this in place ASAP. And so kind of starting these conversations earlier rather than later is another great piece of advice to stick to in all of this. So thinking about getting the next gen involved, once they're on the business or the ownership side of the farm or heading that direction, have them have some real responsibilities beyond just kind of the manual labor that they may already be really, really well versed in. have them be involved in some sort of decision making, or at least observing how you're making or how the leaders are making decisions. Because a lot of times we see, and this happens a lot in farms, where the next gen doesn't know how to make a decision because the current gen has made them all. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, or that the senior gen is doing it maliciously. It's what they know, and they know this so well, and so it's just second nature for them to make a decision and to make all the decisions. And so when the next gen is at a place where they have to make those decisions, they don't even know where to start, and they can become real paralyzed in trying to make a decision. We also want to think about owners, but those that may not be working in the business. What education are they going to need? How are you going to make decisions there? Is what kind of threshold for decision making for the farm it just should be correctly held in the business circle, or between those working in the business and those that are not of relation working in the business? And what level of decision escalates to the ownership circle? This could be things like selling the land, selling the whole farm, buying something else, something that may take a big capital investment. Some families have a certain threshold, like a dollar amount when you're buying a new piece of equipment. That needs to be an ownership decision. If it's below a certain level, those that are in the business can handle it on their own. But really mapping out what decision making is going to look like if there are owners that aren't working in the business is really critical to get crystal clear before a family gets too far into it, or you're going to set them up for a lot of strife. And as part of this, we want to have continued education for both the family and the business, because things are going to change, things are going to grow. If you think about that, back to that 3-circle model, how people are moving through those different circles, that's where we want to continue to educate them on decision-making, things they're going to have to deal with in the future. So our last piece here on the next gen, before we shift into the lens of the senior gen, is some best practices for developing those future leaders. So I mentioned this already about roles and responsibilities, but we've got to have some opportunities for them to make decisions and experience the results of those decisions. We want to be protective and help them a little bit, but if they're completely isolated from the results of their decisions, they're not really having the chance to make mistakes and learn from their own mistakes. And I'm not saying go have them, buy a $100,000 tractor and hope for the best. We want to help set them up with some sort of role where they can make small decisions without putting the whole thing in jeopardy. And as part of this, we want to make sure we've got everybody in the right seat on the bus. Make sure we've got people in the appropriate roles, things that play to their strengths, and that they want to be there. Feedback is really important, and I can share these slides too at the end, but I've got some in an appendix that have some different feedback models to help. But giving and getting feedback are learnable skills. Getting better at giving feedback isn't necessarily about giving more. I had one farmer say, well, I sit down and I tell him every day what he did wrong, so I'm giving him feedback all the time. But just because you're giving more of it doesn't mean that's good. It's learning how to give it both the positive and the negative, and then receiving feedback. And this can be hard for the next gens. It's not just about them demanding feedback or tell me what I'm doing. It's learning how to receive it and do something with it too. So you'll see, and I'll just fly through this quickly. You'll see in the model that I give at the end, you want to identify the situation, mentally prepare yourself to give feedback and find a good time to provide it. Make sure both are wearing the same hat. They know this is going to happen. They're on the same playing field before someone just rolls into delivering a bunch of feedback. Focus on behaviors that you observed and be very timely about when giving this feedback, because you want to be specific. You want to be to the point. You don't want to have this laundry list of things that you've seen over the last 6 months and you dump on someone. You want it to be very, very timely. Describe the consequences. This can help in their decision-making process too, if they can understand the consequences of their actions, that especially as they're moving into that ownership or management circle, it's not just them that is affected by their direct actions. It could be the entire system, or it could be somebody they're working with. And a lot of times in a farming situation, it could be about someone's safety. So this is really, really important. And then as we're giving feedback, we also want to ask for their point of view, give them a chance to respond and actually listen to that. And then as a team, talk about what could have done differently. And one thing I do for the senior gens, if they're really, really uncomfortable giving feedback or they're giving really, really gruff feedback, is ask them to model this by asking their next gens for feedback for themselves and having the next gen answer questions like, what can I do better to support you? Are there any resources the senior gen can help or provide the next gens to help them get their job done? Is the next gen stuck on anything that the senior gen can help with? And if questions like that, where it's setting the senior gen up to be a little bit more vulnerable, but getting the next gen involved too. And 3, what I mean by cultural development here can be a tough one in ag situations because a lot of times we learn by doing. But how can we make this intentional? And how can we, again, shift beyond just the day-to-day tasks to thinking about running the farm like a business? And what do our future leaders of our farming business need to know? How can we help them get there? And like I've been saying already, start early. This can start from the very first time out of the house onto the farm. We can talk about who are they going to report to if you've got some management structure involved. How can we best set them up as early as possible? All right, shifting then from next gens into senior gens. I'm going to start with the first steps in leadership transition. So this is something you can help your families and your clients with. These are some basic questions to get them thinking about their own transition. What are their current day-to-day responsibilities? Have them make a list. I have some that keep just a little notebook with them in their pockets and they jot down kind of a couple of times a day how they spent their last few hours of each day. How long do they want to keep doing those? This can also be helpful if they've got a list and you're passing it from, say, one owner onto a couple. This can help them divvy up who's doing what, so you've got some clarity around roles and are making sure things don't fall in the gaps. The second question here is how could succession planning and business continuity alter the health and harmony of their family? Both the good and the bad. What could go well, what could not go so well? What are roadblocks they may want to be on the outlook for? And who will be most affected by these decisions? And are they currently involved in how decisions are made, or is this going to be brand new for them? So then if you look at the business as a whole and not just the leader, what does the overall business leader need? What skills do they need to have? What are the responsibilities? Who is capable and who wants to? Some family members are super content not being involved in any sort of business or ownership decision, and they want to show up to work every day and that's it, and that's a-okay. Then we also want to think about the role transition, not just again from management of the farm, but of ownership too. And what are those expectations? And I want to make a note here, more transitions fail because of poor communication and mistrust, rather than a next gen not being prepared or there not being a plan in place. It's communication of that plan and those not trusting the plan where transitions go off the rails and where people end up in a fire sale situation. So we want to make sure those expectations of the next gen are clear and that they're very openly communicated. All right, moving in then to these next generations working together. So the next couple of slides I have for you are conversations that I've seen with these next gens working together with their current gens. And so these are some of the big things that we hear. So for the senior gen, coming from the viewpoint of the next gens, don't make joining the farm an obligation. When possible, have me gain some outside experience working elsewhere to gain exposure to other businesses. Like I mentioned, this isn't always possible in farming families, but if it is, they could go work on another farm. I've seen some co-ops where they do kind of a rotation or switch family members with when they can. There could be some schooling here to provide that outside experience. And I know there's a lot of opportunities out there now for different networking and getting to know other young farmers in the same situation. And that can be really, really helpful. Along the feedback loop here, provide goals, give objective feedback, room to make and learn from our own mistakes. Again, because farming families do work and live so closely together, this can be a tough one. And increase responsibilities for them step by step as the next gen is moving into successive positions, as they're moving up the food chain, give them more to do and have those be heavier weights. Then on the flip side, for the next gen coming from the viewpoint of the parents or the
Some
senior gen,
spinach and tomatoes on it too will be great.
take some initiative and show your passion. Push to take on more responsibilities while keeping the senior gen informed. We see a lot where the next gen likes to go off and do their own thing because they think they're invincible and they know what's best. Something goes wrong and the parents or the current gen didn't know anything was happening. So we want to keep everybody informed. And we want to separate business issues from family issues. We see a lot in generational transitions that those get really murky. Those circles that we talked about at the beginning get really blended. So we want to make sure those are separate when we're talking about transition. These are just the next few slides I'm just going to show you. I'm not going to read all these to you, but this is from an exercise that was done. These are real responses with the senior gen or the current gen and their next gens. We divided them up into their respective generations for discussion. And then we debriefed and compared as a larger group. So this could be an exercise you do with your clients or with your families, where divide them up and we ask them the same set of questions. So we ask both generations, what landmines exist for our generation that we need to be aware of to plan for overcoming? And so this table here are all of the answers that came out of that. The next generation, or the next question was, what can they do to help us prepare for and execute improvement and plan for the future? And then what can we do to help them prepare for and execute improvement and plan for the future? And this one isn't on here, but I had a next gen family member go, well, I could pack all his crap and bring it out to his car for him. So be prepared for some of the answers you're going to get. But this is just a really great reflective exercise to get both sides, each generation, thinking about not only what can we do for them, how can they help us, and vice versa. And then what do we all need to be on the lookout for? Where could this go wrong? What could get in our way of a successful transition? And opening that conversation up before you're putting pen to paper and you're truly planning for it. That what could go wrong? What do we want to look out for? And then let's do this together. So then lastly, let's bring this all together and I'm going to give you some best practices and some tips to help farming families successfully plan for succession and leadership. So when possible, get it down in writing. It doesn't have to be massive, like a shareholder agreement where it's 18 pages long. Have them think in bullet points. What's important? What do they want to achieve? Where do they want to go? And then have them run some fire drills on it. If what we're thinking plays out the way that we have it written down, is that truly what we want to happen? Where I've seen some families have a plan written down, they think it's going to go a certain direction. It actually does have to happen, or some unfortunate thing happens and the transition is activated. There may be things that they've missed, or something they thought was just a given, wasn't written down, didn't happen. So if you can play out some different scenarios, you can cover different areas or uncover some gaps in a transition plan or a leadership succession plan that they may have missed. Or, I don't want to transition everything at one time the way I have it written. It looks like it's going to. So you can help them kind of break up how the transition is going to go. And I do have some families that were really hesitant to get it in writing because they thought that was, writing it in stone and it couldn't change, and that was really scary for them. But getting it in writing increases the chances of it actually happening. So again, it's not permanent. Things can change all the time. Review that transition plan often, but getting it down in writing increases the odds of it actually happening. And then once we've got it written down, we want to talk about it, right? More transitions break down because of a breakdown in communication. So we want to talk about it. Start with the family. That's really important. Talk to those that are involved. Be very, very clear about what's going to happen, about expectations, especially if they've got maybe some kids that won't be owners or won't be involved. Talk about this. Then other employees, if they've got them on the farm, and put their stake in the ground, stick to it. This is the plan that we came up with, and here's how we're going to roll with it, and emphasize that process. We're going to be thorough. We're going to be fair. Our goal is to choose the next leader who ... And that's the skill set that the next leader of the farm needs. If you've got multiple family members that could lead together, how are they going to work together? How are decisions going to be made? These are all things that you want to communicate. Like we talked about owners that aren't working in the business. You could have where the farm can't support that many owners. So you're just going to have those that are operating the farm be an owner. But does that mean the other family members, their kids can't someday work for the farm? Those are all questions. Once you figure out how the next ownership transition is going to shake out, then we need to help them think about the next step. What are the kind of the consequences or questions that could come up by this initial transition down the road, and start planning for transition, non-transition. So timing for all of this is about 3 years when possible. 5 to 7 is ideal, but really not realistic in the farming sense because things change so fast. But when you think about a basic model for making ownership level decisions, have the senior gen deciding where the next gen is shadowing, then they're both making those decisions together. And then the next gen is taking the lead on decision making, and the senior gen is the one shadowing. And purely shadowing. They're helping and providing influence, but not overruling the decision. And then some basics then to think about this from the lens of the senior gen, for the system as a whole, driven by the senior gen, but really to open it up for a larger conversation. Just some basics if you've got some families or clients that are really stuck and feel overwhelmed by all of this. Just start a real basic. What do we want for the future of this? Is it important for us to keep it in the family? Is it not? What if we don't have family members that want to be involved? What could that look like? What do we want in terms of the next gen working in the business? Do we want anybody that wants to? Do they have the equal opportunity to? What do we want when we think about the next gen working here? What do we see around our family's ownership in the future? Should all of our kids be owners? Should their kids be owners? What is that going to look like? And then what would that ownership mean for the health of our family? How would that affect us? Kind of my what not to do's as a last note here. Don't let them avoid it completely. It's going to happen whether they want it to or not. So the more prepared they can be for it, the better. Don't let them wait too long to begin planning. This is what we call drop dead plans, that they're going to wait until they drop dead and the family is going to have to deal with the fallout. They can handle it when they're gone. Don't let them assume they know what others are thinking. This happens a lot when you think about senior gens and their relationships with the next gen and vice versa. Don't let them make assumptions about what they're thinking on the other side. Don't let them make joining the farm an obligation. The next gen shouldn't feel like they have to be there, or the fate of the family rides on their shoulders. Don't make that an obligation. Don't let the senior gen hold on too tightly. Again, about avoidance, don't let them avoid conflict. And don't let them keep the business or the farm stagnant. And by that, I mean that it's not growing or not going about business as usual. It's what we see a lot in times of change, and especially transition or generational transition. They tend to focus a lot on that and forget or ignore kind of the business side of things and growing the business or keeping the business going. And so then when the next gen is in a position of authority, all of a sudden you're trying to get the farm going again, or you're trying to get things back up and running, or you're going to be passing the farm on to 4 owners instead of just 2, but you're not scaling the farm at the same level as you're scaling the ownership group. And that sets the whole system off on a really poor note, and not really a fair chance to have your transition plan play out. So have them and encourage them to really keep focusing on the business as well, as they're going through the family or the leadership transition.